Now, of course, there are different ways of approaching that. What we'll always have to do, though, is we'll have to manage our set filters in main Dart, because that is the only place where we can in the end reach both the filters screen and also reach the category meals screen, which is in the end where we need to pass our set filters. So I want to manage my filters globally in here. And in the state management module, as I already mentioned before, we'll learn about another approach that allows us to manage state that affects multiple pieces in the app in a global place that's not the main widget here, which always has the downside that the entire app will rebuild whenever we change state here, even though it might not affect the entire app. So here in my app, for the moment, however, I'll have to manage all my state, and therefore I'll convert this from a stateless widget into a stateful widget, just like that, by using the refactoring tool. Now up there, I want to store which filters the user set, and I'll do this in a map with strings and Boolean values. I'll name that map filters, and I'll set an initial value here. In the end, I have keys, which are gluten, for example, and I'll set all these values to false initially. So that simply is my default setting for the filters as we start the app. Just like that. Now, of course, the goal is to update that map when the user sets the filters on the filters screen. Now, we could update this with every switch the user clicks there, so that if I click here, we automatically update our filters here in the main Dart file. That would be absolutely fine, but it's not the approach I want to use. Instead, I want to make sure that the user has to click a button on the filters screen, which then updates the filters here in the main Dart file. For that, let's add a new method here in my app state, which won't return anything, which I'll name setFilters. And there I also expect to get a map with string keys and Boolean values, which I'll name filterData. And as always, the name of that argument is totally up to you. Now that method should be called from inside the filters screen. Let's say it should be called when the user there clicks a button in the app bar. So in the filters screen widget, I'll add actions to the app bar, and I'll add an icon button there, where I set the icon to icons, to an icon where I use icons save, which is this save icon here. And when pressing this button, then I want to trigger this function which I'm just defining here in the main Dart file. Now passing that function here to the filters screen is pretty simple, because the filters screen is configured here in the routes table. So that's now an advantage of using named routes. When managing your state here in the main widget, in the main Dart file, then you have all your widgets that you load through routes be created here in that same widget, in that same file. So if you want to pass data there, like this property or this function here, so the setFilters function, or a pointer at that function, you can do that. Here to the filters screen constructor, I can pass a pointer at my setFilters function. And now that's passed into the filters screen and available there. So in the filters screen, I can now expect that. I can now expect a function, which I'll name saveFilters, which is set through the constructor. So let's add the constructor here, where I target this saveFilters. And now this function I'm passing in the main Dart file is forwarded here into the filters screen and is used there. And therefore now here, when pressing this button, I can refer to my widget, because the reference to that saveFilters function is stored in a property of my widget, not of the state. But you learned that you can reach out to your widget with the special widget property which Flutter gives you inside of your state objects in your state classes. So here I can reach out to the widget and then simply call saveFilters and not add parentheses, but instead again just point at it and pass it as a pointer to unpressed. At least for now. That will soon change because I will need to pass some data to saveFilters, but for now that will do. Now back in main Dart, we now set up the connection between filters screen and the main app here, and we're able to call a method defined here in the my app state in the filters screen, which is pretty awesome. So now set filters is callable, and later it will also get some data. And then I want to use that data to update my filters here. Therefore, here we can now call set state. And in set state, I want to override my existing filters, so this property up there, with the filter data I'm getting. Because it will have the same format, it will be the exact same map. I will make sure that this is the case. If you want to be really sure, you don't use a map here, but a custom object, a model you create. I'll take the more quick and dirty way of using a map here, where you of course then have to make sure you're using the same keys. For an object, you would get auto-completion by your IDE and extra type checking by Dart, but for this scenario here, a map should do. And I'm then overriding my filters here with the filter data I get here. Now, of course, we also have to make sure that we now adjust the meals we present to the user based on the filter. Now, at the moment, the meals that are available here in category meals are fetched directly from the dummy data Dart file. That has to change. Instead, I want to manage my available meals here in the main Dart file. So I'll add a list here, a list of meals, which I'll name available meals. And as a default, that should be dummy meals. And for that, of course, you need to add an import to the dummy data.dart file. And again, I'll adjust this import path to be /dummydata.dart. So now I import my meals here in the myapp state or in the main Dart file, and I use it here in the myapp state to initialize my available meals. Now meal is my model, which I also need to import here to be able to use it. It's in the models folder, meal.dart, and with that import added, this works. So when the app starts, my available meals is basically just a pointer at the meals I got here. Now, when I set a filter, I want to change that. Then I want to set available meals equal to dummy meals, but now I use where to filter the dummy meals. And then I convert this back to a list. Now, for filtering, we pass a function to where, which receives every single meal, and then has to return true if we want to keep it and false if we want to drop it. And now we have to go through all the filters we can set to decide whether a meal should be kept or not. Now we'll add that in a second. But first of all, let's make sure that we now use the available meals in our category meals screen. That means that again, down there where we set up the route for category meals, we can forward available meals. And in the category meals screen widget, we now just have to accept that. So here I'll add a new final property, which is a list of meals, which I'll name available meals, and then add the constructor, of course, and initialize available meals. And now use widget available meals down there instead of dummy meals. So instead of dummy meals, I just use widget available meals. And now the available meals are managed in the main Dart file, which is exactly how it should be, because there I can now filter them. Because that's also the place, the main Dart file, where my filters are managed. That's the global source of truth for the entire app. So we can get rid of the dummy data import now in the category meals screen. And now back in the main Dart file, we can work on the filtering logic. Up there. Now for filtering here, I simply want to check all my filters with if statements here. So I can check filters underscore filters, which is this property here, and check if gluten is true. So just this here is equal to equals true, right? So if you just have if filters gluten, that automatically compares it to true. If that is set to true, we know that we want to exclude meals that do have gluten in it. Now in our meal model, we see that we have is gluten-free, is lactose-free, is vegan, is vegetarian as properties. So if a filter is set for is gluten-free, we only want to include meals that are gluten-free. So we can add another condition here, and we check, is this filter set? And if yes, then the second part of this condition is also evaluated. Then we check, is the meal gluten-free? If it is not, hence the exclamation mark at the beginning, then I know that I don't want to include it, so we can return false. Remember that in this where method, or in the function we pass to where, we have to return false if we don't want to include a certain item in the newly generated list. And the newly generated list should respect all filters. Now, therefore, I check if a gluten filter is set, and if it is, then if the meal I'm looking at is not gluten-free, I know I certainly don't want to include it. I don't even have to check the other filters. It's not gluten-free, I'm filtering for gluten-free items, I don't need to include this one. And I'll repeat that same logic. So if I have a filter for lactose set, then if my meal is not lactose-free, hence the exclamation mark in front of this check, I want to exclude it. Same, of course, for vegan. If I'm filtering for vegan and my meal is not vegan, hence the exclamation mark, I want to exclude it. If I'm filtering for vegetarian here and my meal is not vegetarian, hence the exclamation mark, I want to exclude it. That's my logic. If I make it past all these if checks, then I know either I'm satisfying all these filters or no filters are set, and therefore I will return true to keep the meal I'm looking at in my available meals. That was a lot of talking. Now we can finally wire it up, and for that we need to make sure that set filters receives a filter data map that looks like this map. So we can copy this map and go to the filters screen. And there I'm calling widget save filters. Now actually, of course, I want to do this in a way such that I forward the data I gather in here about which filters the user selected with the switches in this on this page. So I'll actually use an anonymous function here so that I can call widget save filters myself, like this. And I want to pass my data to that. So my selected filters, that's a map, and the values for each of these keys here, the values are of course the values I manage up there. So for gluten, I'll set this equal to gluten-free, what the user chose there, and the same for lactose-free, for vegan, and for vegetarian. And then it's this selected filters data, which I forward to save filters, which in the end triggers that set filters method here in my app state. Let's give that a try. Let's save that all and do a full restart with the green arrow. And as a default, no filters are set. And let's now set vegetarian as a filter and hit save here. Don't forget that, you need to save. And then go to meals, quick and easy. And indeed, you might remember that previously we had a burger in here, and the burger is not included anymore. Now what we're not doing at the moment is, if I go back to filters, I don't reflect my currently set filters here. So let's do that as a next step to finish up that filtering logic. Of course, it would be nice to see which filters we set here on the filters screen, and therefore we have to make sure that we don't always initialize these with false values, but actually with the values that are set here in the main Dart file in my app state. So that means that I simply want to forward my filters here, my current filters, to the filters screen. So besides a pointer at the set filters method, I'll also forward the current filters. And in the filters screen, we can therefore get that data. So here we'll get a map with string keys and bool values, the current filters, that sounds like a fitting name, and that will be the first argument I get here, the current filters. And now here, we should actually not initialize this with false, or at least not keep it set at false. Instead, we can now use init state to really set our own initial state when this state gets created, with add override, and important with super.init state. And now in here, we can override these values based on the values we get in our widget current filters map. And there for gluten, I'll set my gluten-free value. Now we can repeat that for lactose-free, access the lactose key on the current filters map we're getting. For vegetarian, access the vegetarian key. And for vegan, access the vegan key. And now when this state is created, which happens when this page is loaded, we initialize our values here and therefore also our switches to match our currently set filters. So back in the app here, I restarted it completely. Let me now again filter for vegetarian meals and save this. Never forget that. Go to meals, quick and easy. The burger is not there. Now let's go back to filters here, and we see that's also still saved. Let's now also filter for gluten-free meals and save this. Go back to meals, and now the spaghetti are also gone, as they should. So this should now all be working, and if we clear our filters here and save that, of course, our recipes are back. So that's looking pretty sweet. Filtering works. Let's now work on the favorites.